Give me a definition of evolution. What is evolution? Change of space and time. What about evolution? Descent with modification. Same basic idea. Change through time. Descent with modification. Descent is the time. Modification on the change. So we're talking about the change in the frequency of different forms relative to one another in subsequent generations, right? So the first take-home message was we do a crappy job of teaching that to people, unfortunately. And our job is to correct that. And so we want to talk about how evolutionary theory developed, what its proper form is, and again, your homework assignment is to go out and teach someone about it who doesn't understand it properly. If they can walk away and they understand it, they don't have to believe it, but if they can understand it, then you've succeeded in your job, all right? So, we started talking about evolutionary thought and its original development. So, Aristotle, major contribution. Scala-Naturae, what was important about it? Life was what? Interconnected and fluid. That's exactly right, interconnected and fluid. Stoic philosophers, major contribution.
Fossils.
Fossils as evidence of what?
Past life.
Past life, very good. The chain of being was basically the idea that life was not fluid. It was rigidly locked in place at the point of origin, correct? Albertus Magnus, not really contribution, but definitely a player. Removed what? Humans from the scale of nature, right? Very good. Who gave the justification?
Thomas.
The student. What was the justification?
Humans
are divine, have a soul, all the other rest of the organisms do not. Okay? All right. What are the three basic tenets of creationism? God created everything.
Life is immutable.
Life is immutable, it doesn't change, and
Earth is
young. When we take a look at evidence from around the world, however, we see lots of exceptions to those basic ideas, correct? So biogeography. We see things that are similar but in very widely dispersed places. We see things that are completely isolated all over the planet, right? Well, what are the questions there? How'd you get there if you started in one place, right? And what does all the similarity and the differences mean? Comparative morphology. You see lots of parts that don't work. Are things perfect on this planet? Far from it. Actually, the joy of biology is not perfection, it's the imperfection. Imperfection is the stuff of evolution, okay? So it's not the perfection. Perfection is a dead end. Perfection ends in extinction. You don't want to be perfect. It ends up with death. All right? Imperfection is the way to go. Those imperfections are built upon over time, resulting in evolutionary change. Also, when you take a look at the different parts of organisms, they're similar but different. Often things start out in the same way, but they're utilized for very different functions. They have different form. And then finally, we took a look at geology and fossils, which are critically important. They are evidence of past life. When you look at the simple layers down at the bottom, they represent the past, perhaps. You look at things at the top, that represents the present, perhaps. You see complexity and increases over time in that complexity. Some things in the past are no longer here. Others show long lineages through history. But what does all that stuff mean? Is there a relationship between the layers? Do the layers mean time? Everyone at this particular point who had the intellect to do so and the time and the money to be educated is starting to think about these ideas. All right? So, this creates novel hypotheses. How did all this stuff get there if it came from one source of origin? Maybe it did start in one place. Maybe it was what? Started in multiple places all over the planet, right? The other idea is, well, things are not perfect states. Maybe they've been what? Changing over time. That's exactly it. All right, that brings us to Buffon. He said things did change. They changed for the what?
Worse.
They changed for the worse. What was that idea called?
Degeneration.
Degeneration. Very good. He also said the environment had an influence on that degeneration, and the Earth was what?
Old.
Pretty old. Pretty actually, a lot of guts to state that these days, even though he was scared and he did. All right? Erasmus Darwin, major contributions to the development of evolutionary theory. Competition plays a part in species creation.
No.
Species what?
Formation.
Formation. Big distinction there, right? Animals respond to changes in their environment, and offspring can do what? Inherit change is major components of the theory of natural selection, all right? Espoused by Darwin's grandfather. Also said that life could do what? That current life could possibly what?
Descended from a common ancestor.
Descended from a common ancestor, basic component of evolutionary theory. One of the core components that we'll talk about in detail. Theory of uniformitarianism. Who came up with that idea? Lyell and Hutton. What was the basic idea? The Earth is old, and it's doing what? It's changing gradually, evolving, and it's more importantly, that's what?
Normal.
Completely normal. The Earth is old, it's gradually changing, and changing at uniform rates, and that's normal. How old is the Earth? 1 to 2 million years old. If they could have dug deeper, guess what? They would have said it was a lot older, okay? They kind of stopped at those base layers. William Smith, really important player. What was his idea? Looking at fossils in the rocks, they are rocks, so what does that mean about the fossils? They're as old as the rocks, and that means life is 1 to 2 million years old based on Hutton's and Lyell's estimates, okay? Cuvier and Lamarck. Different ideas about how things change over time. What was Cuvier's idea? Theory of catastrophism. So what was left over today that you see around are what? Survivors of past extinction events wrought by God. Lamarck's side, on the other hand, was organisms were basically in an environment that presented challenges. What did they do? They modified themselves over their lifespan and then could do what? They could pass those traits on. Is that accurate? No. This is called orthogenesis, which is what? Straight line evolution, which is what the vast majority of the population of the world thinks evolution actually is, which is completely inaccurate. All right? Because some of his ideas were quite good, though. The environment does drive evolution. His mechanism of how it changed was wrong, but the environment does drive evolutionary change, which we'll talk about in lots of detail. All right. So, this brings us to Darwin. Darwin traveled the world. He found 3 major findings along the way. As the environment changes, what else changes? Species composition. Fossils are related today, but they're also what? Structurally different. And the Galapagos Island shows that living things are also the same but different, right? How do you explain that? All right, so basically this brings us to Malthus. Malthus' idea was what? Geometric growth of? Populations. Arithmetic growth of? So what happens when you exceed the food supply? You compete, meaning more things are born than there are resources available to support them. Competition plays a thing in self-sorting them out. Best traits will win. Alfred Wallace, exactly the same stuff seen as Darwin, same basic ideas summarized succinctly in a 2-page letter, which is available to read on Google. All right, go look it up if you want to read it. It's a quick read, and it'll summarize all of natural selection very succinctly. All right. What are the 5 basic principles of the theory of natural selection as espoused by Darwin and Wallace? Number 1, in all species there's what? Overproduction of progeny. Because there's more born that can be supported by the resources, what do? They compete for those resources. All species possess a what? A lot of variation. The best variants will do what? They will survive the battle for competition in terms of resources. And what will they do with those traits? They'll pass them on. That's an amazingly simple idea, but it's an amazingly powerful idea. And it's the driver of most evolution on the planet. All right. What is Darwin missing? How what? How do you make variation and how do you pass it on? Those are the 2 parts he spent the rest of his life trying to figure out. So here's the thing about the theory of natural selection. These kinds of ideas, did Darwin create anything new? Not really. He just synthesized what was already known, and he looked at it in a new way. So it's like looking at this chair from this side, and everybody's looking at it going, yeah, that's a chair. And he went over here and said, well, it could be something else. But it was the same stuff, right? So that takes a special mind. Most of us do not have that mind, me included. So most scientists are going to be what we call brick makers. And we make damn fine bricks. All right? We make the bricks that build a house. But often we don't know what the house looks like. We just build the bricks. So what you do is you see lots of scientists do this. They create these little studies, they gain information, they make a nice brick, and they put it aside. But every so often, in every generation, there's somebody who takes those bricks and takes them from that pile and stacks them up in a brand new way that creates something brand new we've never seen before. I hope in this class there's one of you. All right? So in my kind of career is mid-career. I'm not that person. I've come to that point in my life where that's okay. I make damn fine bricks. I just know what they're going to make eventually. All right? So I'm hoping one of you will take one of my bricks and do something cool with it. That's what we kind of do. So that's kind of our life as a scientist, right? But I'm hoping that 1 or 2 of you are those special kind of people that can really grab those bricks and rearrange them and be a Darwin, right? Be a Newton. So let's talk about Mendel then. Mendel, very unique individual. Two major features of his personality. Was a great botanist, but also a great what? Mathematician. Combined both those things to look at ways to predict how traits were passed from generation to generation. Wrote it down. Did anyone understand it? No one knew what the hell he was talking about, basically, okay? So his information was kind of buried. It wasn't discovered until later, and its importance. We see that quite a bit in human history. Things in the past will often rear their head in interesting and new ways that drive the future. In ecology, what was it? There was an equation that was super important. What was it? Do you remember? It drove every ecological theory I gave you mathematically. Not exponential growth, but what? Logistic growth. Who did it? Verhulst. Verhulst had no idea that it was going to drive almost the entirety of ecological theory. No clue, but it does. Mendel, did he have any idea it was going to be the driving force of evolutionary theory? No clue. You see that a lot. You see painters and artists and things like that in their day basically shunned. X amount of time later, you realize the genius of that person. That's a common theme. It's unfortunate for that individual because they never get to see kind of the fruits of their labor, but we're lucky those people exist because they drive our future on this planet and hopefully off of it one day, right? If we stay on this planet, what's our future? It sucks, okay? That either means a backwards future where things go backwards, not forward. The only way to succeed and to continue to complete and evolve is to get off this planet and become interplanetary, right? But we don't have the tech yet, but hopefully one day we will, and we'll kill ourselves before we get there. It's kind of what it is, or kill the planet before we do. But that's our future if we want something right. To stay put and locked is not the success of the human species. It just isn't. All right, so that brings us to the divirees. Mendel gave us the way that the traits were passed from generation to generation in a predictable framework, yes? He called those units of information. I just gave you the answer, didn't I? They're units of inheritable information, right? What do we call those today? Genes. Genes. One from mom, one from dad. You pass them forward in a very precise manner. You guys learned how to do that in MCDB 1A, hopefully, correct? With Punnett squares, etc. All right. That brings us to Hugo de Vries. He came up with the idea of how variation was how it was created. How was it?
Mutation.
Through mutation, right? The idea that these units of inheritable information described by Mendel would spontaneously change. Now, he had no mechanism for it, so basically he said it was magic, right? But we know how they change today. What is it? Mutation is the way, but what's mutating? DNA is mutating, right? Changes in the genetic coding is what's happening. And they happen every time we replicate something. They happen from external sources which damage DNA. There's lots of ways that you can modify DNA, all right? And so mutations arise which give us brand new stuff to work off of. And so that was Hugo de Vries' idea of mutation. He also was the first one to coin the term, the pan-gene, which is basically another description of the heritable unit of information. We cut that, get rid of the pan, what do we have? A gene, which is a coding section of DNA. That brings us to Watson and Crick. I think we talked about them, right? They were the ones who found the unit of heritable information in terms of how the code was all distributed. DNA, deoxyribonucleic acid, right? That's where it's all stored. That is the encyclopedia of life. That brings us, I think that brings us up to speed, yeah? Yep. Well, you can basically assume all these ideas then into Neo-Darwinism, which was popular from the 40s to the 70s. And so it is a combination of Darwinian ideas of natural selection combined with basic genetics, the idea of mutation, right? However, this idea does not actually pair that well with the fossil record. So what this idea is basically saying is you have slow, gradual change through space and time of organisms based on their environment, regulation by natural selection which weeds out the poor variants and supplies the best for given environmental constructs. And it's a slow, gradual change. The problem is when I look at the fossil record, does it look that way? Is it slow and gradual? No. Sometimes it is, but often evolutionary change is rapid and extreme and abrupt. So it does a poor job of explaining cleanly the periods of rapid change that we often see on the planet in terms of speciation events that occur. So in looking at that data in a more modern construct, we have Gould and Eldridge. And so Gould and Eldridge came up with the idea of theory of punctuated equilibrium in the 70s. And so basically their idea was, there are long periods of stability where hardly any evolutionary change occurs, punctuated by very rapid bursts of evolutionary change and diversification. So this is neo-Darwinism, slow gradual change through space and time, and then over here is this rapid diversification as espoused by Gould and Eldredge. That does a very nice job of explaining the periods of rapid change that you see in the fossil record. Well, what causes it? It's rapid changes in what result in that speciation events that occur widely across the planet or given localities. Catastrophes typically due to environmental change that occurs very rapidly. So any kind of rapid environmental change typically stimulates species events on the planet. Things like asteroid strikes, right? Massive climatic shifts on the planet, massive periods of geologic activity. Right now we're in a period of relative stability, right? We've never known a crazy period of time where things have gone nuts, but they exist. We're talking things like, if you take a look at the continental United States, there are super calderas underneath us that are basically very much dormant right now, but don't necessarily have to be. There's a caldera that's underneath Yellowstone National Park that spans something crazy. I can't remember how many miles and miles and miles across it is. I think it spans almost an entire state or something like that. There's a super caldera that's basically right here north of us at Mammoth Lakes. Anybody been to Mammoth Lakes to go skiing or gone there in the summer to go hiking or fishing? So you ever seen Mammoth Mountain? Is it a mountain? Mammoth Mountain is actually not a mountain, it's a volcano. So when you come up the normal side from 395 and you look at it going east to west, it looks like a mountain. But if you actually go down the back side of it where the lakes are and look at the mountain from that side, it's got that flat volcanic top, and you can actually see that it looks just like your standard picture of a volcano. So the interesting thing about that is that's just a little volcano. Right? Think about the destruction Mount St. Helens did. That was fairly dormant too, just like Mammoth is dormant. Right? However, when you actually look at it globally, when you look at it from a satellite perspective, you realize that that is just a little pinprick on a larger crater. So this is Mammoth. This is actually the true crater. That's just one little active pinprick on it. This erupted about 25,000 years ago and covered 4 states in lava. You can still see that lava when you're traveling up to 395, which is the most boring route in the world, right, to get there. And when you're kind of bored, if you look to the right as you're going up, you'll see gigantic lava walls that span, 10, 30, 40, 50 feet in the air of solid lava. Pretty impressive, right? So that's what it actually looks like. Those things are relatively dormant, so we're kind of in a period of stability right now. But that one's not necessarily last. All right, so now we have something to describe the quick periods. We have something to describe the long periods. Well, what do you do then? You can just combine them together, and that'll give you the overall picture that very cleanly describes the fossil record. And so that brings us to the modern theory of evolution, sometimes simply referred to as synthetic theory, and that's what we have today. Now, in this particular theory, what is it saying? It is a combination of multiple ideas. That's why it's called the synthetic theory. So it is a combination of neo-Darwinism, which again is natural selection combined with Mendelian ideas of how you pass on the code. And then you have population biology, how populations exist. We talk about evolution. We're not talking about evolution. We talk about ecology. And we talk about the way the populations interact. We're going to see how they pass on genes. And then punctuated equilibrium is espoused by Gould and Eldredge. So it's a combination of all of those things. It describes very cleanly short bursts of evolution followed by long periods of slow, gradual change and adaptation to current environmental conditions. So when the environment shifts rapidly, some get winked out, some have opened new territory and new niches and take advantage of that. Rapid speciation events occur, and then once things settle down, you have slow, gradual space change through space and time as envisioned by Darwin through the process of natural selection. All right? We're also going to see later on that chance has a big impact on evolution. Modifications in descent, therefore, can occur gradually. I can get changes that are gradually, rapidly, or some combination of both. So when we think about it, again, not this, it's that. And so when we talk about this as a whole, evolution is the most powerfully defined principle in all of biology. Understanding evolution allows us to basically talk about all of the biology that we have in a coherent way. We talk about why things look the way they do, why they behave the way they do, and why they function the way that they do. It also explains this basic dilemma that we've been talking about from day one, which is when people observe, why are things so much the same but yet so much different? And evolution actually answers that basic question for us. And so this is the way to think about it. And this is what most people don't have an understanding about in the general population. So, are you more evolved than a snail? No, you're not. If I was to strip you butt naked and threw you out in the garden and said, survive and reproduce, how long would it last? How long would you live out there? Do an experiment, just lock you in the backyard. We don't let you in. You can't leave. You got no access to anything except what's in the backyard. How long would you live? 3 or 4 days at most. Then you die. You don't do very well. Garden snail, any problem? None whatsoever. Live their entire life. If I was to throw you out in the Congo and I put you with a troop of mountain gorillas and I said, have fun, survive and reproduce, how long would you last? Well, they might kill you right off the bat. If you survived the introduction and they took you with you, the first thing they'd do is they'd march you out and the dominant male silverback would walk out into a patch of stinging nettle and say, eat it. Could you do it? You might try, but you put it in your mouth, it'd swell up, you choke to death and die. They're all eating it, no problem. So they're highly adapted and specialized for their environments, and they do a great job. So are you for your particular environment. So you often hear the term primitive characteristics and advanced characteristics. They don't imply that one's better than the other. All they imply is that they're newer in terms of evolutionary time. So here's the basic idea of why things are so similar and yet why so different. So, do you share similarities with the snail? Yes. Absolutely. You share DNA, exactly the same coding agents. They're just organized in different ways, but it's the same exact stuff. The basic way that you break down food on the very first step, is it identical? It is. It's identical to bacteria. I'm sure you guys have learned this probably in physiology. You talked about cellular respiration. What's the first step in cellular respiration? You guys remember? Glycolysis. You ever heard that? You should, right? Glycolysis is the first step. Almost every living creature on the planet that's a consumer, right, is going to break that down as their first step, the glucose. So we have something, a bacteria hasn't changed in 3.3 billion years. It still has the same basic process that you carry today. So what's the general idea? If it works, what do you do with it? You keep it, and there's no need to modify it. So there's you'll never find this in a textbook, but this is a great way to think about it. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. It works. So things in the past that evolved that still work today, we have. That's why everything's so similar. However, if it doesn't work, what do? You modify it. Or it can be modified, or it's lost. So what happens is as the environment changes, it presents new problems. New problems need to be solved in interesting and unique ways. So certain traits are modified over time to do that. So why are things so different? Because they're modified to solve new environmental problems. So for us, we have lots of advanced characteristics. Why? Because we evolved in the most recent terrestrial habitat on the planet, which is what? Do you know what habitat we evolved in as a species? Any idea? Grasslands. Thank you. That's exactly right. And so grasslands present a unique environmental set of problems that we basically have developed adaptations to do. Why do you think you stand up so straight up and down on 2 legs? So you can look what? Over the grass and see predators coming. Simple things like that. All right? So advanced characteristics are there because they solve a new environmental problem. If it's still there, it worked in the past, it works right now. So the way to think about it is this. Not that first thing over there. Evolution looks like this. You start with the common ancestor, it branches. Sometimes it's slow, sometimes it's rapid. Then it slows down again. And it speeds up. When you look around the planet today, can you guys see that, or is it over the top? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. This is present time. So this is the present, this is the past. If I trace back, what do I start with? A common ancestor. We share traits with that common ancestor. All life does. Why do we share those traits? Because they work. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. Organisms across the top share a myriad of traits with that very first living organism. However, they're very different. You look very different than a gorilla. You look very different than a worm. You look very different. You function and act very different than a snail. Why? Because you live in different environments that create different problems for you that are solved via adaptation. It's not that you're any better than them. You just specialize for different things. Okay? So these have lots of advanced characteristics, new stuff, because the environments are new. So everything today is at the same state of evolution. It's just that certain things have more primitive characteristics because they still what? Work. So a snail has many, many more primitive characteristics than you do because it still works and their environment hasn't changed for a long, long period of time. We have many advanced characteristics because our environment is relatively brand new. Does that make sense? That's how it works. So it is not this straight chain. Did we evolve from a chimpanzee? You should say no immediately, right? That's wrong. Evolved from a monkey? No. But do we have common ancestry? We do. In the past, we share traits from that common ancestor. So that's the way to think about it. And most people don't see it that way. They look at a worm and say, well, that thing's just some primitive nothing, you know? We're the best of the best. No, not really. I defy you to dig through the ground and eat dirt. Tell me how long you're going to live. Right? It doesn't happen. So that's the basic idea. All right? Specialization. You hold it because it ain't broken. You don't want to fix it. You leave it alone. If you need it, you modify it. That's the way it's worked over time. So that's what I want you to explain to the general population. Go talk to your communications major, or roommate, or whatever they are, all right? And see if you can explain that to them. And let them tell it back to you if they understand. All right? This explains again why so much the same. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. Why so much the different? Because you're solving new problems in new environments, and that requires changes in morphology, physiology, and behavior. What's the process of how it works? Natural selection, which weeds out the weak, right? Basically creating the strong by increasing the frequency of their traits. It's a crude way to think about it, but it's fairly accurate. Population biology coming into play, chance coming into play, periods of slow gradual change when the conditions are stable, periods of rapid species diversification and change when the conditions are changing rapidly. Make sense? That's it. Was that difficult? It's not. It's simple. That's why I said evolution is a simple, simple game. The cool thing about evolution is that's the whole synthetic theory. That's what makes sense of it. But it has two component parts. Microevolution and macroevolution. So we're going to spend the vast majority of this class talking about the microevolutionary process, basically leading to speciation in some cases. In PEMB3, you're going to talk about macroevolutionary change. All right, I'm just going to give you the microevolutionary part, give you enough to understand the macroevolutionary part. So